what made you say, okay, did you say, oh, I want to go into tech?
So I became a database administrator. From there, I sort of found my people, and I thought actually infrastructure is where I want to be. And I've now become an infrastructure manager, and I absolutely love it. But that's not the career I thought I would have at all. When I was at school, it wasn't advertised as a career. We had career planning days, and they brought in wedding planners.
Wedding planners?
Because we were an all-female school. And this is why I think we need to look more at education level.
Did you have any access to IT courses, or particularly the more technical side?
We did a little bit of coding, like designing a website, whereas perhaps if we'd looked at more technical aspects, Windows patching and all that sort of database, the back end stuff, rather than that front end GUI making it pretty, perhaps you'd see a lot more women in the infrastructure space now. There is nothing in tech that a woman can't do.
Welcome to the Cantium Podcast in partnership with Public Sector Focus. My name is Debbie Rose and I'm the Education Systems Lead at Cantium, and I'll be your podcast host for today. Today we'll be talking about the importance of gender diversity in the tech industry, exploring the challenges that women face, and discussing how we can create more inclusive environments to encourage and support women in tech. With me today to discuss this topic is Amy Austin-Barnes, Infrastructure Manager at Cantium. So Amy, can you give us some statistics about women in the tech industry?
Yeah, so at the moment, women make up 25% of the tech industry, and 11% of the tech industry executive roles are held by women as well.
And how does that compare with Cantium statistically?
So at Cantium, our female workforce is 33%.
Okay.
And our executive roles are 25% female as well. So actually, we're looking pretty good compared to the national statistic.
It feels that way, though. I really feel like there's we work in quite a gender diverse environment at work. I don't feel that there's an abnormally vast split. I mean, how is that broken down into teams? Because obviously you're in the infrastructure team, and how is the split there? I've read that that's quite a gap in your team.
Still quite a gap, I think, and I imagine that that's the case everywhere. So what I want to work towards is getting more women involved in tech, in particular in the infrastructure space. And I think doing things like this podcast, advertising that we do have strong female leads and that we're gender diverse as a company is going to encourage that. What's interesting is at the moment, actually more of our females in tech are in application support. So
yes, my team is actually quite the other way in terms of our gender split. We have more women than men working in applications. But I guess what I want to kind of get to is, why do you think, because obviously infrastructure is probably, I don't want to say it's more technical necessarily, because there's, technical elements of the work that people do in my role for sure. Yeah. But I would say that we tend to find that's different in infrastructure, whereas the split, the gender split is more. I think what is it in your team? Is it 90%? Yeah. 90% male.
90% male, 10% female at the moment. I think some of that comes down to education and getting women into tech careers at a younger age.
So if you don't mind me interrupting, how did you start your career? Was from school, what made you say, okay, did you say, oh, I want to go into tech? That's my passion? Because I would say sometimes, well, I fell into a lot of the things I do, but things that I will experience jobs, and then something takes my interest and I go from there. But how did that happen for you?
100% the same route. So I left school knowing that I didn't want to go to university, higher education. So I looked at an apprenticeship. Became an apprentice, taking phone calls for Kent County Council in their call centre.
Okay.
Moved on from there to get a higher paid job as a member of the service desk team for the EIS Centre. So that was the Education Information System Centre. So looking after IT support for schools. And that sort of opened my eyes to, there's a career here that I can do that's tech, and this is interesting actually, and I want to get my teeth into it. From there, I moved up into the SIMS team, so the MIS application team. And that piqued my interest a little bit more in sort of the back end of the systems and looking at the databases. And there wasn't, that team was female driven, but there wasn't any females leading that sort of back end and looking at the more technical aspects of it. So I became a database administrator. And from there, I sort of found my people. And I thought, actually, infrastructure is where I want to be. The beauty of that, though, is that there wasn't many other females. And from there, I've been able to sort of work my way up with mentorship from the leaders that we do have. And I've now become an infrastructure manager and I absolutely love it. But that's not the career I thought I would have at all. And it's only once I got into tech that I realised you could do something with that.
Yeah.
And this is why I think we need to look more at education level. When I was at school, it wasn't advertised as a career. We had career planning days and they brought in wedding planners.
Wedding planners?
Wedding planners. Because we were an all-female school. So our career day was planning weddings. And I just think if actually someone had said to me, there's a career option here, you can work with computers and do really cool stuff and look at databases. Okay, it's not 100% guaranteed I would have been interested, but at least I would have known that that was an option and not had to fall into it.
Did you have any access to like IT courses or particularly the more technical side? Because I guess we both had access to, looking at an Excel spreadsheet or looking at a Word spreadsheet, a Word document, and practicing on how computers work essentially. But I don't recall having any database training or code. I had no idea about.
We did a little bit of coding, like designing a website,
Okay.
which I think actually that might add into your stats about why application teams are more female led, because that's all we're shown. Whereas perhaps if we'd looked at more technical aspects, if we'd looked at Windows patching and all that sort of database, the back, like I said, more back end stuff rather than that front end GUI making it pretty, perhaps you'd see a lot more women in the infrastructure space now.
I'm interested to explore why women might be more interested in the application side of things. I don't know if you were around for the MySpace era.
Yes. Yes. Massive fan of MySpace, editing all the HTML.
Changing your own page, making it your own, creative. But without nobody, if I'd seen that at school, I would have been all over it. I would have absolutely loved it. But I never had that opportunity. So, on my own, at my computer, being creative and making things look the way I wanted to, putting my own music on my page. I loved it. I think at school, slightly unrelated, but it's always been an issue across not just maybe tech, but in sports. So at school, for example, boys did rugby, girls did netball. Yeah. But I do think that's changing. I do think education is changing. I don't hear of that. I mean, my son is 7, so he's just going into sort of the junior school now. So I'm yet to see kind of, I think some of the where sports or courses are split, you'll see that more in the secondary. But I can see that changing, particularly with schools that we work with at the moment.
I think there's definitely been a shift, and I think you can see that in media as well. So if you think back to films when we were younger, the person behind the keyboard doing all the hacking and stuff was always a man. Yeah. And now there's been a real shift actually, and you're seeing more females in those roles. So I do think that we're breaking down some of those barriers, and I think there's still work to be done. There's always going to be work to be done. And that's why it's important that we're doing things like this podcast. I think that companies need to look at mentorship programs. Yeah. And I think schools need to look at better opportunities for all genders to get into different careers, and not just you're on this track, you're on this track.
I mean, I'm a governor at the local school, and it's actually quite a nice split in the school. There are an equal number of governors in genders, but I feel like we're a very gender diverse team at Cantium, and I think a lot of that is also to do with how flexible Cantium is as a employer. I mean, I don't know how you feel about the fact that Cantium promotes flexible working.
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference having an employer that supports flexible working, especially where there's always a concern that women are perhaps being passed up for roles in any industry, not just tech, for reasons like childcare and maternity leave. Yeah. So when you have a flexible workplace, I think that encourages and allows people to, you can be a mother and work in the tech space. You can come to work. There's no odds. We also have a lot of women in the leadership roles. Like I said, we've got 25% of our executive roles are held by female.
Yeah.
And that really helps having that strong influence there. So like my manager's a female, I'm a female. And it makes a big difference seeing yourself represented in the workplace.
Question I kind of wanted to throw out there to you though was, how do you feel about flexible working now compared to pre-COVID? Because I do wonder if in some way COVID has made a difference in flexible working, or is Cantium, because you've been here longer than I have, so it's just interesting for me to know. I find Cantium really flexible. I'm able to complete all the tasks that I need to, and I get the opportunity to be a mother and find that balance. I'm absolutely dedicated to my role and my job, and I think that Cantium understands that, but it just did cross my mind as to whether you think COVID has made any difference in terms of flexibility pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Absolutely. I think pre-COVID we were in the office 5 days a week, but if there was a problem, major traffic jam, some reason that you couldn't be in the office, they were flexible and allowed you to work from home.
So parents could still pop along to sports day and support their children. Yeah,
absolutely. Post-COVID, obviously, big change, whereas we're not having to be in the office full time, and it is more our choice, I suppose. As long as the business needs are met, we're flexible to do what we need and work around our personal lives and whatever else, training as well. We get plenty of time for training, which is amazing. But yeah, I think it's just a shift that there's probably more people at home now.
Yeah.
But I like the fact that it hasn't stopped anyone working. I don't feel like anyone's questioning if the work's getting done, because you can see that you can see that the results are being delivered.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that's kind of going way, like almost way off topic, but it's not, because actually for me, that impacts me massively.
Was that a big part of you taking the role, do you think, that there was that flexible working?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when I had my interview, I applied for the job. I didn't know about the flexible working, and it was mentioned in my interview. And I remember sort of sitting back and saying, really? Like, so what if I needed to go to sports day, for example? And it's like, okay, then you can do that. Really? You know, it's been, I think, my previous role was student facing, and so I definitely think there's a difference there, because if you have to be among students, then, and I worked at a university, then you have to be, that customer focused facing role. And so I guess there are roles that you can't have that kind of flexibility in the same way, but equally it was very regimented. You start at this time, finish at this time, whereas I know Cantium's a bit different. I think if I haven't got the headspace because it's very busy and the phone's going, and I think, do you know what, I'll actually park that piece of work and I can do that like later on when it's quiet, or I can say, well, I'm going to go home and do that bit from home because I need to not have the noise that there's in the office. But equally, coming in and connecting with other like-minded people is really handy, and for sure my manager is female as well, so it's great. So why do you think it's important to have diverse representation in tech?
For me, it's really important that we're not having one-sided conversations when we're problem solving, troubleshooting. You need all sorts of opinions. So we're not just talking female opinions, race, background, class, whatever. You need diverse workforce in order to make sure that you're coming at your problems with all the tools necessary.
Yeah,
there are
and all your past experience, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. Everyone comes from a different background. We all think differently. We've all seen different things, had different experiences. And that's really important when you're putting that towards problem solving, or even sort of coming up with new ideas and innovation. You need to be challenging each other.
Absolutely. And that makes total sense. So what advice would you give any women looking to get into the tech industry?
I think don't be afraid. Although it may seem like a male-dominated industry, you can see by the stats we talked about earlier, things are on the rise, things are on the change. There are opportunities out there, and take them, take the learning. Just because perhaps the education system isn't offering it. There is plenty of free resources available. There are great people on YouTube who do whole hour-long videos going through Microsoft training accreditations. Take those resources, take those opportunities, look for mentorship programs, look at businesses like Cantium, where I think we're doing women in tech well.
Yeah. I wonder if you could encourage young women to contact, or any women, but young women to contact who are perhaps in education, people like ourselves, through the likes of LinkedIn, then, women are more than happy to discuss, like we are, how they got here, what they've done, ideas, ways to explore things that maybe other people might not have considered, and that might really help people develop their careers.
Absolutely. I think that's why it's so important doing this podcast today, to show that we are willing and happy and able to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, I think there is nothing in tech that a woman can't do.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Amy.
And you. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Cantium Podcast in partnership with Public Sector Focus, please subscribe wherever you're listening or by visiting www.cantium.solutions.